I mean, what I'll do is I want to talk a little bit about our union and also the way that the late Bob Crow and myself and several others stood for No to EU many years ago and sort of put the left workers' perspective on that, and distance ourselves importantly from UKIP and right-wing Tories, and that we've had quite rightly no part of their campaign and no truck with them. Because I can go back when I stood in the North East along with Martin Levy from the Communist Party and a girl whose name escapes me from the Socialist Party. I remember I spoke at a big meeting in Middlesbrough, and it was packed with all the other candidates from the major parties. And when I finished speaking, the UKIP candidate stood up and said, "I agree with everything he's just said." And straight away I knew I'd failed, because there is no comparison. Farage famously said after an appearance on Question Time with Bob Crow that he would have a pint with Bob Crow any time, but I very much doubt Bob would have wanted to have a pint with him and his racist policies, because that's what they're about. Their argument is about racism and about big business, and has been mentioned already, the Bosses Club. It's not very often I agree with Mick Whelan, the General Secretary of ASLEF, but on this occasion I'll certainly agree with him, because he said it's a Bosses Club. And that's what it is, because they want free movement of labour, capital, etc. in a different way that we would. We are not against Europeans. We're certainly not against overseas rather than foreign, because foreign means alien, and I don't like using that word, but overseas workers coming here. We welcome it, and the point has always been not to stop them coming over here, but to be united as workers across the world, as Karl Marx famously said, and in raising their standards and making people realise that at the end of the day, it isn't each other that we've got to fight with. We got no fight with the French, we got no fight with the Albanians, we got no fight with Romanians, none of them. Our fight is with international capitalism, neoliberalism, call it what you will. And that's exactly what the EU is. It's to promote that. They are bringing in terrible, terrible conditions of austerity on Greece, and Greece caved into it. Syriza made a lot of promises and unfortunately reneged on them. They're now suffering. The people are suffering, and it wasn't us, it was the big businesses of the EU, helped by America and all the rest of them, who created this situation. The unions and workers in Britain are suffering, but not because overseas people are coming doing their jobs, because they're doing the jobs that a lot of people over here wouldn't want to do and won't do. They're bringing in 0 hours contracts, which I know the Bakers Union and my good friend Ronnie Draper had a magnificent victory against Hovis a few years ago, has been said. But this is sneaking in more and more. And you get an argument from people on the left, and Frances O'Grady, who I know very well because I sat on the General Council, but I've never agreed with her in my life, I don't think. She turned round and said, we are protected by the European Union. Workers' rights, trade union rights are protected. That is untrue, it's a myth, it's wrong. I've worked now for 44 years. I started in the shipyards, and I have seen over the 44 years a deterioration in trade union rights, attacked by both Labour governments and Conservative governments. I don't see the EU ever protecting my rights. When I started work in 1972 as an apprentice welder in the shipyards in Middlesbrough, we had a vote on a strike with hands up, that was it. We were a closed shop. I'm going to be careful here, because I'm not greatly in favour of that, because well, if it's used right, it was okay, but at that time basically it meant the shop stewards had the power of gods, and if you pissed off your local shop steward, you could be what they call branched, expelled from a union, then you couldn't work. So there was a lot of corruption going on. I'm not afraid to say that, but it was true. But since then, we've seen our rights deteriorate and deteriorate and deteriorate, even though we've been in the EU for years and years. Now the CGT, my good friends at CGT in France, communist-based trade union, they have the rights, but that's in their constitution. We haven't got that. We've got nothing to protect us, and we're getting nothing from them. I've just been short 5 minutes, so I better start moving on. The second myth that they push at us is there's been no wars in Europe. No, but every single country in Europe just about has been involved in wars around the world. So that myth of a peaceful Europe, within Europe, yes, but without Europe, we're all involved with it and all the ramifications that means. I can't understand last year's TUC. There was a resolution by the GMB, and they said then that if there was any chance of our conditions as trade unions and workers being eroded, we would consider voting to leave. And the reason I'm bringing that in is because there's only ourselves that I know, the Bakers Union, our good friends there, and ASLEF, who've actually stood up and said, no, we don't want no part of it. And we are arguing from a left position. The left groups, I don't have to name them, but I will, the AWL are the forefront of it, and the Labour Party, what they're coming out with. And I know Jeremy Corbyn very well, I know MacDonald very well, and I'm disgusted with their U-turn. Don't tell me they held a ransom by their party. They could have made a difference. They could have spoke the same as Johnson speaking for the Tories. They could have come out against it. They've been to our union conferences and they told us they're anti-Europe. This argument, this myth on the left that you need to be part of it to change things, that is not going to happen. There is no way that you will change the EU from within it. It's the same as the Labour Party, and I've been saying this for years and I'll carry on saying it. You cannot change it from within because it's too far gone. There is nobody in the European Union, so-called leadership, the commissioners, etc., who has any interest in being changed apart from feathering their own nests and helping their friends in big business make as much money as they can. I was going to touch on TTIP, but I saw other people which I've noticed that TTIP, now they're saying they've sort of gone a bit cooler on it. The EU was cooler on it because they're waiting to see what our result is. But you bet your life, as soon as this vote and the referendum's over, that will be back on the agenda, because the same thing happened with my union several years ago with the fourth railway package, and some of you might not know what that is. I was invited to speak at the European Parliament as president of the RMT, and I stood up, and so did the French, because it's in their DNA, and so did the Swedes, but I was the last speaker from the anti-fourth railway package. The fourth railway package is putting out all the railways across Europe to private tender. And the German trade unions, who should be bloody ashamed of themselves, are in favour of it as long as they're running it, as long as it's their companies, because that's the game they're in. And we've seen their carry on over here for people who know about the railways with Deutsche Bahn and how they behave. And I stood up and gave the case from us on why privatised railways were bad. Overcrowded trains, non-existent safety, chasing profits, dilapidated trains, dilapidated track. I don't have to tell you the problems, you've seen them yourselves. And the commissioner stood up after me, and I had no right to reply, unfortunately, and said it's great to see our UK brothers, he called us, perpetuating the usual myths that privatisation is bad. And the ETF, which we are part of, the European Transport Federation, told us a couple of years ago that it was off the agenda. It isn't, it's back on. And you need to understand this, because it won't just be the railways, it'll be everything. It'll be the NHS, and don't believe UKIP or the Tories when they say we come out of Europe, we'll have more money to spend on the NHS. If it was socialist running the country, you can imagine that. But they won't be spending that money on the NHS, make sure of that. But once a law is passed by the EU, that's it. That's it. As long as you're a member, that's it. You cannot change anything. And as Tony Benn, I'll finish on this, famously said, in Britain, if you don't like your government, you can vote them out. You cannot vote the EU out. These commissioners are unelected, undemocratic and unrepresentative. Please vote no, comrades.